By the time you hear a little girl's voice on a winter night whisper, "Sir, we haven't eaten since yesterday," your heart already knows this isn't just another story. Picture it. A blizzard, the kind that swallows sound and erases footprints, rolls over the edge of the city. Everyone with somewhere to be is already inside. Curtains drawn, doors bolted. Streetlights blur in the white haze like distant stars sinking into snow. At the very end of a long, silent road, one house glows. The Blake estate. From a distance it looks more like a vision than a building, its tall windows spilling warm amber light into the storm. Inside it's quiet, ordered, expensive. The furnace hums. Logs pop gently in the study fireplace. A man stands alone behind a heavy oak desk, his world built on decisions, numbers, and discipline. His name is Ryan Blake. Outside that same house, trudging through snow that keeps swallowing her ankles, is a woman who has already run out of choices. Her name is Eliza Hughes. And in her arms, shivering in a thin coat, clutching a worn stuffed bear with one torn ear, is her little girl, Lisa. The night was unforgiving. Snow fell so thick it blurred houses, street signs, even the line of the sidewalk. Each flake seemed harmless alone, but together they built walls on the pavement, on rooftops, around hearts. The wind didn't howl, it pressed, heavy and relentless, stealing warmth with invisible hands. Eliza's breath came in ragged bursts, fogging the air as she marched forward. She hadn't felt her toes in a while. Her fingers were stiff where they clutched the strap of the old duffel bag slung over one shoulder. Her thin coat flapped open at the hem, the button that once held it closed long gone. Snow caught in her tangled blonde hair. Her cheeks burned with the kind of cold that feels like fire. In her arms, Lisa clung to her with all the trust a child can give. The little girl's curls were dusted in white, her lips tinted a worrying shade of pinkish blue. Her tiny fingers dug into her mother's shoulder through the fabric. She hugged the stuffed bear against her chest like it could shield her. Frost clung to the small plastic eye of the toy. Most children cried in cold this deep. Lisa did not. She pressed her face against Eliza's neck and whispered, "Mama, I see lights. We're almost there." Almost there. Two words Eliza had whispered to herself for months now. Almost through the worst. Almost to a job. Almost to a place where the heater worked. Almost to some kind of normal. But as she stared ahead at the mansion sitting like a golden island in a sea of white, almost felt as far away as summer. Her knees trembled. The snow had gotten deeper without her noticing. Each step felt like lifting lead. Her muscles had gone from burning to numb. Hunger gnawed, relentless but dull. She couldn't remember the last proper meal she'd had. She remembered instead the last half slice of bread she'd given entirely to Lisa, pretending she wasn't hungry. Her body remembered, though. She forced one more step, then another. Her foot slid on a patch of hidden ice beneath the snow. Her leg buckled. The world tilted. She dropped to one knee, trying to twist as she fell so Lisa would not hit the ground. The duffel bag slammed into the snow with a dull thud. Then her other knee hit. Pain flashed bright, cut off quickly by the cold. She tried to stand. Nothing responded. Her arms shook violently as she tried to push herself upright, but they gave way. She sank sideways, still holding Lisa close. Snow rushed up to meet them like cold hands. It soaked her skirt, seeped through her threadbare stockings, crawled along her skin like 1,000 sharp needles. For a moment the world went white. The storm wrapped around them, a curtain of ice and silence. Then a small hand moved. Lisa pushed herself up, breath coming in tiny clouds. She wiped snow from her mother's face with clumsy, red fingers. The skin on her knuckles was raw and cracked. She had no gloves, none that fit her anymore. "Mama," she whispered, her voice shaking but determined, "I can walk now. I'm not tired if you're not." A lie, an innocent, beautiful lie. Tears burned behind Eliza's eyes, but frozen lashes held them back. She tried to smile, tried to make her voice light. "You're very brave," she murmured. "Braver than Mama." Lisa straightened her little shoulders like a soldier. She slid off her mother's lap, boots sinking into the snow, and turned toward the estate. The iron gate loomed ahead of them, tall, dark, and dusted in white. Beyond it, the driveway curved through the trees, lights lining the path like fallen stars. Inside the house at the end of that drive, Ryan Blake pressed fingers to the bridge of his nose and exhaled. His study was immaculate. Every book on the shelf in perfect alignment, papers stacked neatly. Laptop open, paused on a screen of numbers and charts. A muted news channel flickered from a television on the wall, commentators, lips moving soundlessly over subtitles about markets and mergers. He wasn't really reading any of it. He told himself he liked Christmas because it meant markets slowed and emails thinned out. The year wound down into something manageable. He told himself that the quiet was earned. But if anyone had walked in right then, they might have noticed the way he kept glancing at the empty corner of the room where a tree should have stood. The small box with ornaments, untouched in the closet since his last attempt at pretending holidays, meant something in an empty house. He turned away from the TV and walked toward the security console almost out of habit. The monitors showed the grounds, tall fences, trees weighed down with snow, the long driveway, the gate. On one screen, something moved. He frowned and leaned in, adjusting the angle. A woman, a child, snow. He watched as the woman stumbled, watched as she went down, tried to rise and fell again. His chest tightened. The child disappeared from view, then reappeared, tiny and determined, dragging herself through the snow toward the gate. Ryan's hand moved before his thoughts did. He zoomed in. As the little girl reached the intercom post, she lifted her fist. The knock was so soft the outdoor microphone almost didn't catch it. She hit the metal once, twice. Her hand trembled violently with cold. She tipped her head up, eyes searching for a face she could not see. Ryan could see her, though. Her cheeks flushed and wet, lashes tipped in frost, lips trembling but trying so hard not to. "Sir," she said in a voice so small it nearly broke the speakers, "we haven't eaten since yesterday." The words shouldn't have hit him the way they did. Ryan had heard every kind of plea over the years. Business pitches, desperate requests, occasionally manufactured sob stories from people who only saw his net worth. But this was different. There was no performance in the little girl's eyes. Just exhaustion, a stubborn kind of hope, worry for someone other than herself. It cracked something in him he hadn't realized was still breakable. He didn't call security. He didn't buzz the intercom and ask questions. He left the study so fast the papers on his desk shifted in the wake of his movement. The front door swung open on a burst of cold air. Snow rushed inside in a swirl, licking at the polished floor. Ryan stepped out, the warmth of the house instantly stripped from his skin. The wind bit through his sweater, his breath turning white as he crossed the front steps and strode down the walkway. By the time he reached the gate, the cold had numbed the edges of his own fingers, but he ignored it. He keyed in the code and pushed the heavy iron aside, its hinges groaning. The little girl flinched at the sound but didn't step back. Her eyes went up, 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 tracking him as if trying to determine whether he was danger or rescue. Up close she looked even smaller. The coat she wore was too thin for this weather, sleeves a little short, mittens nowhere in sight. Her stuffed bear dangled from one arm, its fabric stained and patched. Her hair curled wildly around her face, flecked with snowflakes. Ryan didn't ask who she was. He didn't question why she was there. Instead, without a word, he shrugged off his own coat, heavy and lined with wool, and wrapped it around her shoulders. The hem nearly swallowed her. Warmth rushed in around her small body. She gasped at the sudden contrast, her shoulders sagging with relief. He crouched to her height and brushed melting snow from her cheeks with his thumb. Her skin was like ice. He frowned. Then he looked past her. The woman he'd seen on the monitor was trying to stand again. Her knees slipped in the snow. Her hands dug into the white ground as she pushed, only to slide back. Her hair, damp and tangled, clung to her neck. Her lips were nearly blue. Still, even as she struggled, one hand reached blindly toward the little girl, as if to keep a thread of contact between them at any cost. "Are you okay?" Ryan called, stepping toward her. She managed to get halfway upright. Her eyes met his for the first time. They were a soft hazel, the kind that might have looked warm in different circumstances. Right now, they were dulled by exhaustion and edged with fear. Not fear of him exactly, but fear of what might happen if he said no. "We're sorry to bother you," she said, voice cracking halfway through the sentence. She tried to straighten, tried to make herself look less desperate than she felt. "We just needed somewhere warm for a while." Her breath hitched. "We'll be gone by morning." There it was again. The apology people with nothing felt obliged to give for the crime of existing. Ryan didn't ask why she was out there, didn't ask how she'd gotten there or what had happened to her life. Those questions would come later. Right now, there was only one thing that mattered. "Come in," he said quietly. No conditions, no negotiation, just an open gate. Lisa turned to look up at him, something like disbelief flickering across her small face before folding into a tiny smile too tired to fully form. She reached back for her mother's fingers, offering them like a bridge. "Come on, Mama," she whispered. He said yes. Eliza tried to move and stumbled. Snow shifted beneath her feet. Ryan stepped in before she could fall again, his hand closing firmly but gently around her elbow, steadying her. "Easy," he said. "I've got you." 3 simple words. He said them in 100 boardrooms, about numbers and contracts. They had never meant as much as they did now. Together, they crossed the threshold of the gate, leaving the storm behind them. 2 lives that had been drifting, and one man who had spent years making sure no one got close. None of them knew it yet, but the moment the gate closed and the snow wind muffled on the other side, the story of their lives had already changed direction. The warmth of the kitchen hit Eliza like a wave. It smelled faintly of cinnamon and cedar, with a deeper note of something savory still lingering in the air. A long wooden island stretched across the center of the room, granite counters gleaming under soft, yellow pendant lights. A fire crackled in a hearth built into the far wall, logs glowing orange. Eliza stopped just inside the doorway, dizzy. After weeks of shelters, nights in a car, bus stations, and one particularly cold stairwell, the sight of a real kitchen felt unreal. Too spotless, too safe, like something she might break just by standing in it. Lisa didn't hesitate. She slipped her arms out of Ryan's coat carefully, but refused to let it go entirely, dragging it behind her as she climbed onto one of the tall stools at the island. Her legs dangled, boots tapping lightly against the stool's rung. Her eyes were huge as she looked around, drinking in every detail like she was memorizing it. "Sit," Ryan said gently, nodding to the chair next to Lisa. Eliza sank onto it stiffly, nervous energy coiled beneath her skin. Her hands trembled in her lap. She didn't know what to do with them. Every muscle in her body expected someone to come in and tell them to leave, to accuse them of something, to demand explanations. Instead, Ryan rolled up the sleeves of his sweater and walked to the pantry. He opened cabinet doors and pulled out what he could find: broth, pasta, a bag of potatoes, some carrots. His movements weren't smooth like someone who cooked often. He knocked over a box of crackers and muttered under his breath as he bent to pick them up. The knife clinked awkwardly against the cutting board as he chopped. Eliza watched him, confused. "You don't have to do that," she said quietly. "We're grateful for the heat. We can manage with whatever's around." She hated how small her voice sounded, how rehearsed. Ryan didn't look up. "It's not about have to," he said. "It's about should." He filled a pot with water, added stock, dropped in potatoes and noodles. The soup wasn't fancy. No carefully layered flavors or artful presentation. Just a simple, clumsy effort that smelled better with every passing second. When the steam began to curl upward, Lisa leaned forward and sniffed. Her eyelids fluttered with something like joy. "We weren't planning to beg," Eliza murmured, more to herself than anyone. "We just needed somewhere warm just for tonight. I told myself I would." She swallowed the rest of the sentence. Ryan ladled soup into 2 bowls and set them on the island. "Then don't call it begging," he said. "Call it dinner." He slid 1 bowl in front of Lisa. She didn't dive in. She picked up the spoon carefully with both hands and stirred once, twice, then took a cautious sip. Her eyes closed when the heat hit her tongue, the warmth sliding down into a stomach that had been empty too long. A small, involuntary sound escaped her, half sigh, half hum. Eliza's eyes filled instantly. She pressed her lips together, willing herself not to cry in a stranger's kitchen. Ryan pretended not to notice for a moment, giving her that sliver of privacy. Then he spoke softly. "Eat," he said. "You're safe here tonight." Eliza wrapped her fingers around the bowl. They shook. The soup was too salty, the carrots overcooked, the noodles a little mushy. It was the best thing she'd tasted in months. She took 1 spoonful, then another. The warmth spread through her chest and into her bones, thawing something that felt like more than just cold. Across the island, Ryan leaned back against the counter, arms crossed loosely, watching them without stirring. He noticed the way Lisa kept glancing at her mother, as if checking that she was really allowed to do this. Eat without counting slices, without pretending she wasn't hungry so Mama could have more. He noticed the way Eliza's shoulders slowly dropped from around her ears, her posture shifting from defensive to tired. "Thank you," Lisa said quietly halfway through her bowl, looking up at him. Her voice was stronger now, but her tone held the same earnestness as when she'd stood in the snow. Ryan nodded, incapable of doing anything else for a moment. "You're welcome," he replied. "You both are." The storm outside raged on, wind pushing snow against the windows, but inside the house something else gathered. Warmth, not just from the fire, but from the simple act of 3 people sharing a table. For the first time in a long time, nobody was asking Eliza to fill out a form, justify her existence, or move along. For the first time in a long time, Lisa's hunger was gone before she fell asleep. For the first time in a long, long time, Ryan wasn't alone in his kitchen. The stairs creaked softly under their weight as Ryan led them up to the 2nd floor. The hallway was wide but not intimidating, lined with framed photographs of landscapes and a few black and white shots of city streets. The sconces cast a warm, honey-colored light that softened the edges of his otherwise sleek, modern home. Ryan stopped halfway down and opened a door on the right. "I thought you might be more comfortable here than in the big guest wing," he said. "It's closer to the fire." He stepped aside. Eliza peered into the room. It wasn't the lavish suite she'd imagined a house like this might offer. It was simple, almost modest. A medium-sized bed covered in a soft quilt, a small armchair near a window that looked out over the trees, a low bookshelf with a few children's picture books and an old teddy bear sitting on top like a sentry. In the corner, on a small wooden stand, stood a miniature Christmas tree. It wasn't decorated with shiny glass angels or glittering ornaments. It wore only simple red ribbons and a few pine cones. 1 strand of fairy lights wrapped around it, glowing softly. At the foot of the bed lay a folded blanket. On the pillow, a card in neat handwriting read, "Rest well." Eliza froze at the threshold. Her first instinct was not relief. It was fear. Fear of touching anything, of leaving a mark. Fear that this was a mistake and at any second someone would appear behind her and say, "Not you, not your kind." Her fingers tightened on the strap of her duffel bag. She couldn't seem to make herself move. Lisa, on the other hand, moved like she'd been here all her life. She slipped out of Ryan's coat, laying it carefully over the armchair. Her small boots thumped against the wooden floor as she walked toward the bed. She climbed up without asking, pressing her hands into the mattress, eyes shining. "It's soft," she whispered, awe in her voice. "Mama, it's so soft." Ryan watched Eliza instead of the room. He saw the way her shoulders turned in slightly, her body unconsciously making itself smaller. He recognized the look. He'd seen it in the mirror of the group home bathroom the day he'd been brought there as a child, clutching a garbage bag of clothes that weren't all his. He stepped back a pace, putting space between them so she didn't feel cornered. "I didn't know if you prefer something grander," he said quietly, but she looked like she needed something small, safe. Eliza turned toward him. Her eyes flicked from his face to the room, then back again. Emotion quivered along her jaw. "This is," she swallowed, "it's more than enough." Ryan nodded lightly, as if relief didn't just loosen something in his chest. "I'll be down the hall," he said. "If you need anything, knock on the study door. It'll be open." He hesitated, as if he wanted to say something more, then placed his hand briefly on the doorframe instead. Just one quiet point of contact with the world he was inviting them into. "Good night, Lisa," he added. The little girl had burrowed under the blanket up to her chin. She turned her head toward him and smiled, small but glowing. "Good night, sir," she said. "Thank you for the soup." He tried to answer, but his throat felt tight. He managed a half smile and left the room. The door closed with a soft click. Silence settled. For a long moment, Eliza just stood there. Then, like a string cut loose, she sank onto the edge of the bed. Her hands shook as she unzipped the duffel. Inside were the last fragments of a life that no longer existed. A few worn shirts, Lisa's second-hand sweater, a little handmade pillow with uneven stitches, and a small fabric pouch tied with string. Eliza untied it. She shook out a frayed photograph. Her husband, David, cradling newborn Lisa in his arms. His hair was a mess, his smile exhausted, but his eyes had shone with a fierce joy that had nothing to do with money, success, or expectations. Those eyes had gone dull by the time the cancer took him. She traced his face lightly, then set the photograph on the nightstand. From the pouch she pulled a faded blue hair tie. Lisa's brave band, she called it. On the worst nights, when the car's engine wouldn't start, when the shelter was full, when the cold seeped into their bones, Eliza would tie it in Lisa's hair, telling her that as long as the blue ribbon stayed put, they'd find a way. Now she curled it into her palm and closed her fingers around it. Lisa's voice floated across the room. "Mama," she whispered, eyes half closed, "is this heaven?" Eliza blinked back a tear. It slipped free anyway, warm against her chilled skin. "No," she said, sitting beside her and stroking her hair, "but it feels a bit like hope." Lisa smiled and tucked her bear closer. Within minutes, breath deepened, lashes resting on her cheeks. Eliza watched her sleep for a very long time. She had no idea what tomorrow would bring, whether they'd be asked to leave at first light, whether this man, kind tonight, might change his mind when the sun rose, and all this felt less like a miracle and more like a burden. But for the first time in a very long time, she allowed herself to do something dangerous. She allowed herself to rest. The house was quiet. Snow tapped rhythmically at the windows downstairs, a steady, gentle percussion. Pipes whispered. Somewhere, a heater hummed to life. The fire in the small hearth of the guest room had burned down to soft embers. Eliza woke with a start. For a second she didn't remember where she was. The ceiling above her looked too smooth. The sheets beneath her too clean. The faint smell of cedar and something citrusy in the room unfamiliar. Panic rose before memory caught up. Ryan's house. She exhaled slowly. Lisa lay curled beside her, face relaxed, lips parted slightly, breathing slow and content. She hadn't clutched at Eliza's shirt in her sleep like she usually did. Instead, one small hand rested over her stuffed bear, the other near the edge of the blanket, as if the room itself had tucked her in. Eliza slid out of bed as quietly as she could, feet hitting the cool floor. Her throat felt dry. Too much heat, not enough water. She slipped on her sweater and padded down the hallway, drawn by the dim light spilling up from downstairs. The kitchen was empty, but across the hall, a warm glow shone from the study. She paused at the door. Inside, Ryan sat at the long wooden table, back slightly hunched, fingers wrapped around a mug. He wasn't looking at any screens now. He was staring out at the dark window, where only the faintest reflection of his face showed against the snowy night. Eliza almost turned back, not wanting to intrude. The floor creaked. Ryan glanced over, then offered a small, tired smile. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked lightly. "A little thirsty," she admitted, feeling suddenly self-conscious. "I didn't mean to." "Glasses are on the left," he said, nodding toward the kitchen. "There's water in the fridge." She crossed the room, filled a glass, and hesitated for a heartbeat before sitting at the far end of the table. Not close enough to crowd him, not so far that it looked like she was hiding. For a few moments they sat in silence. The kind that isn't hostile or awkward. The kind that comes when two people are equally tired and out of words for their own thoughts. Ryan broke it first. "She smiled in her sleep," he said quietly. Eliza's hand tightened around her glass. "She did." Her voice was soft, hopeful, disbelieving. He nodded, a little, one of those smiles kids get when they're dreaming about something important or sweet. Eliza's eyes shimmered. "She hasn't done that in weeks," she whispered. Then, almost to herself, "Hearing her laugh used to be my favorite sound. When my husband was sick, she was the only thing that made him forget for a minute." She swallowed hard. "After he died, the dream stopped." She stared into her water, watching the reflection ripple. "I was a nurse," she said after a pause, voice barely above a murmur, "at a long-term care home. I loved it, the old stories, the wrinkled hands, listening to people talk about the homes they missed and the people who had already left them." She smiled faintly. "I used to tell myself I'd open a place one day where they didn't feel forgotten, somewhere soft, somewhere kind." Her fingers tightened around the glass. "Cancer doesn't care about your plans," she continued. "It doesn't care that you pay your bills on time, or that you show up early to work, or that your child is about to turn 3. It just arrives, takes over, and leaves a mess when it's done." Ryan's jaw flexed. "I'm sorry," he said. 2 words he meant more than any apology he'd given an investor in his life. "He got sick fast," she went on. "By the time they found it, it was already everywhere. We sold the car, then the house. Insurance didn't cover enough. I took extra shifts. I stopped sleeping. I kept saying, 'We'll be okay once he's better.'" Her gaze went unfocused, lost in memory. "Then there was no better," she said simply, "just after, and in after there were bills, debt, a landlord who couldn't wait forever. The care home replaced me, said they needed someone who wasn't distracted." She huffed a humorless laugh. "Turns out there's a limit to how much you're allowed to care about suffering." She looked at him then, not asking for pity, not fishing for rescue, just offering truth because hiding it had taken more energy than she had left. "I didn't want to ask for help," she added. "I thought if I could just push a little harder, be a little stronger, I'd get us through. Pride is a very expensive luxury when you're hungry." Ryan didn't interrupt. He knew what it was like to be 5 and watch a mother's back disappear through a doorway and never come back. He knew what it was like to sit on a thin mattress in a row of thin mattresses in a place that smelled of bleach and old sorrow, wondering which part of you wasn't worth staying for. He knew what it meant to decide never to need anyone again. "I grew up in a children's home," he said finally, his own voice quiet. "She dropped me off when I was 5, Told the staff she'd be back once she got things sorted. People in those places hear that line a lot. He stared at his hands on the table, remembering how small they looked against the rough blanket. She never came back. Eliza's breath caught. "You never saw her again?" she asked softly. He shook his head. "I used to tell myself if I did everything right, if I became someone important, if my name meant something, maybe it would hurt less. Maybe the empty bed on visiting days wouldn't feel like a judgment." He gave a short, bitter laugh. "So I built," he said, "companies, walls, routines. I filled rooms with furniture so it looked like someone lived there. But I kept the doors in my life locked in other ways. Easier to be the man everyone needs something from than the boy nobody came back for." He looked up. "Until a little girl knocked on my gate in the snow and asked for dinner." Their eyes met. In that moment, they weren't CEO and homeless single mother. They weren't charity and recipient. They were two people sitting at a table with hands that had worked too hard and hearts that had learned to expect goodbye. "You don't have to be strong all the time here," Ryan said quietly. "Not in this house." Her hand inched forward on the table. Not enough to touch his. Just enough to close the distance between them by a fraction. Enough to say, without words, that she heard him. That she believed him a little more than she did yesterday. For the first time in a very long while, the silence between them didn't feel like distance. It felt shared. Morning found Ryan's study drenched in soft winter light. Golden stripes slipped between the curtains, falling across the desk and the bookshelves and the bronze-colored safe half hidden in the corner. Lisa stood near the doorway, half nervous, half curious. She had learned quickly that this house was full of rooms where adults whispered big things, but Ryan had called her in with a gentle, "Come on, I want to show you something." And she trusted his voice now the way she trusted her mother. She padded across the floor, socked feet barely making a sound. The safe looked old, older than most of the sleek furniture. Time had dulled its corners. The combination dial was slightly worn from use. It looked like something that belonged in an old movie: treasure, secrets, important papers. Lisa tilted her head. "Is there money in there?" she asked, not with greed but with wide-eyed curiosity. Ryan smiled. "No," he said, "something more important." He knelt in front of the safe and turned the dial. His fingers moved with practiced ease. A soft click broke the quiet, and the door swung open on well-oiled hinges. Lisa leaned in. Inside, instead of stacks of cash or gold bars, sat three small, surprisingly ordinary things. A broken plastic ruler, its edge cracked and taped back together. A pair of wool socks, one unraveling around the heel. A folded piece of paper, edges worn, ink slightly smudged. Lisa frowned, puzzled. "Those are your treasures?" she asked. "They are," Ryan said, a soft warmth in his tone. He held up the ruler first. "When I was in the children's home, I went to school with a lot of kids who had more than I did," he explained. "One day, we were supposed to bring supplies. Pencils, notebooks, rulers. I had nothing. I thought the teacher would be angry." He smiled faintly at the memory. "Instead, she stayed behind after class," he said. "She opened her own bag and pulled this out, gave it to me. She said, 'Now you have what you need. The rest you can borrow until you don't have to anymore.'" He turned the ruler over in his hands. "It cost her almost nothing," he continued. "But to me, it was the first time someone made sure I wasn't left out." He set it back carefully, then took the socks. "These were from a boy at the home," he said. "He got new ones for Christmas from a charity drive. He saw the holes in mine and gave me his old pair. Said the new ones itched." Ryan chuckled. "They didn't. He just didn't like seeing my toes through the fabric." Lisa smiled. "He was your friend?" she asked. "He became one," Ryan replied, "because of socks." Finally, he picked up the folded paper. He handed it to Lisa with reverence. Read it out loud, he said gently. Her small fingers opened the fragile fold with care. She squinted at the handwriting, lips moving silently for a moment before sound followed. You were never just a burden, she read slowly. You were always a boy worth staying for. I wish I could have. She looked up, eyes wide and a little confused. Ryan's gaze drifted, as if seeing past the walls into some other time. One of the counselors wrote that, he said. On the last day I was there, she slipped it into my jacket pocket. She wasn't allowed to adopt me. She had her own family, her own life. But that note, it told me something I'd never heard before. He smiled sadly. That I wasn't the reason she left, he finished. That I was worth more than what happened to me. Lisa stared at the note, then at him. You keep them in a safe, she whispered. Because they remind me I was never truly alone, he said, even when it felt like it. He hesitated, studying her small, thoughtful face. Do you have something, he asked softly, that makes you feel like that, like someone cared about you even when things were hard? Lisa chewed her lip for a moment. Then she slipped a hand into the pocket of her hoodie and pulled out the blue hair tie. This, she whispered. Mama always puts it in my hair when I cry. She says blue means calm, and that when it's there I can be her brave girl. Ryan's throat tightened. May I? He asked, holding out his hand. She nodded and dropped the hair tie into his palm. It weighed almost nothing, but he cradled it like crystal. He reached into the safe and slid open a smaller compartment at the bottom, empty until now. Slowly, he laid the hair tie inside and closed it with a soft click. Then this memory, he said, belongs here too, safe with mine. Behind them in the doorway, Eliza stopped. She had come looking for Lisa, ready to apologize for sleeping so late and to usher her away from whatever important things Ryan did in his study. Instead, she found them kneeling together in front of a safe that didn't hold wealth, but proof that even the loneliest boy had been loved in small ways. Her eyes shimmered. No one had ever made space for their stories like this. Ex-shelter volunteers had sometimes patted Lisa's head and said things like, "You're strong, kiddo," but no one had said, "Your memories matter enough to live in a safe." This wasn't charity. This was honor. Ryan glanced over his shoulder and met her gaze. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Because in that moment, she understood something she hadn't dared to believe until now. They weren't just passing through. Their presence wasn't a temporary kindness to be tidied away when it became inconvenient. They were being woven into the fabric of this house, into the story of this man's life. And that, it turned out, was a different kind of warmth altogether. It started with a blurry photo. Someone at a small outdoor holiday market had snapped it without thinking. A man in a dark coat. A little girl perched on his shoulders, arms out like airplane wings. Snowflakes caught in her hair. Her laughter froze in midair. Behind them, a woman in a plain coat, scarf wrapped tight, walking a few steps back, her eyes soft, unguarded. The caption was simple. Local CEO seen, enjoying quiet winter day with mystery woman and child. Overnight, the image spread. Some called it sweet. Others smelled scandal. By morning, Eliza's name, dragged out from old hospital records and legal filings, was splashed in places she would never have imagined. Words like bankruptcy, foreclosure, and unfit housing environment floated around in headlines and threads, stripped of context, stripped of nuance. Someone dug up her husband's medical debt case and posted screenshots of court documents like they proved something about her character. Former coworkers messaged her, some with concern, some with thinly veiled judgment. One with a public comment, "Guess some people know how to land on their feet." Eliza stopped checking her phone. She began timing her trips downstairs for when the staff were busy. She answered Lisa's questions with half smiles and evasions. When the doorbell rang and someone mentioned reporters at the gate, her heart lurched. She packed a small bag one afternoon while Lisa napped. She folded clothes, tucked the worn photograph between shirts, slid the fabric pouch into a side pocket. Her hands shook the entire time. She told herself she was protecting him, protecting Lisa, protecting whatever fragile dignity they had left. She told herself she couldn't bear reading one more stranger's sentence about how a woman like her really ended up in a house like this. By the time Ryan came home early that day, snow still clinging to his hair and shoulders, she was in the living room, bag by the door, rehearsing goodbye in her head. The front door opened. Lisa's giggle floated through the hallway. Higher, she squealed. Ryan appeared carrying her piggyback, cheeks flushed from the cold, scarf dangling. He set her down gently on the rug. "Go upstairs, pick a movie," he said with a smile. "I'll be up in a minute." Lisa nodded and dashed up the stairs, boots squeaking. When Ryan turned back, he saw the bag. His smile faded. He didn't shout. He didn't demand an explanation. He just walked into the room, closed the door softly behind him, and waited. Eliza swallowed. "I didn't want this," she said, gesturing vaguely toward her phone on the coffee table, still glowing with muted notifications. "I didn't want your name dragged into my mess." He glanced at the screen. "I know," he said simply. "They're saying I used you," she whispered. "That I planned this. That I knew who you were when we came to the gate. They talk about my debts like I'm a cautionary tale, as if loving someone who got sick makes me irresponsible." Her voice cracked on the last word. He walked around the coffee table and stopped in front of her. "People will always talk," he said calmly. "About me, about you, about anyone who lives a life they don't understand. We don't get to control that." He paused, letting the words settle. "We do get to control whether we let them decide who we are." Her hands clenched at her sides. "You don't know what it's like," she said, pain sharpening her tone, "to be reduced to a headline." He tilted his head. "I do," he answered quietly. "I was the kid in the group home file labeled abandoned. No other details. For years, that one word tried to tell me what I was worth." He turned, walked to a small drawer in the hall table, and pulled out a soft silk scarf, deep emerald green. He came back and gently draped it around her neck. His fingers brushed the side of her throat, warm, steady. The scarf was smooth, beautifully made but not flashy. "I bought this once," he said, eyes on the fabric rather than her face. "For someone who told me she didn't deserve anything that nice, said her life was too rough for things this soft." He looked up then. She didn't understand that it wasn't about how delicate she was. It was about how much she deserved something gentle touching her skin. Eliza's eyes filled. Her hand went up, thumb rolling the edge of the scarf. "You're not a mess to me," he said, each word firm but tender. "You're a woman who held her life together with both hands while it fell apart around her. You're the kind of mother who walks through a snowstorm with an empty stomach so her child can sleep curled up in her arms. That is not a scandal. That's a story of courage." Her knees nearly gave way. Not because he was offering rescue. Because he was offering a different way to see herself. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "What if staying makes things harder for you?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "They already were hard," he said. "They were also very empty. I'll take complicated and full over quiet and hollow any day." The bag stayed by the door. By evening, it had migrated upstairs without Eliza even consciously deciding to move it, folded back into the closet of the small room that no longer felt borrowed. It was Christmas Eve when the house finally felt full. Not with strangers, not with people impressed by his wealth, but with the handful of souls who had held Ryan up in the thin years of his life. The long dining table, usually pristine and rarely used, was covered now in mismatched plates, bowls brought by guests, serving dishes that didn't quite match the expensive setting Ryan owned. His old teacher arrived with a tin of cookies, her hair now silver, her eyes still sharp and kind. She hugged him without hesitation, called him that stubborn boy who refused to wear a scarf, and wiped an imaginary smudge from his cheek. The man who had given him his first job sweeping floors at a hardware store came too, walking with a cane, his granddaughter shyly holding his hand. An old friend from the home, a lanky, grinning man who now worked as a mechanic, brought his wife and two noisy kids, and immediately started telling Lisa stories about how Ryan once tried to build a raft in a drainage ditch. Lisa was radiant. She wore a blue dress that had been carefully mended by Eliza and washed twice because Lisa said it smelled like yesterday the first time. Eliza had braided her hair that morning, fingers gentle, blue hair tie woven through. Eliza herself hovered near the doorway to the kitchen, unsure where to stand. She wore a cream sweater Ryan had left folded outside her room that morning with a simple note. Thought this might be warmer. It hugged her gently, soft against skin that had grown used to rough fabrics and too thin layers. She watched as these people greeted each other, his people, and wondered if she was an intruder in someone else's home movie. Ryan caught her eye across the room. He excused himself from a conversation and stepped into the space beside her, handing her a mug. Cider, he said, still warm. She wrapped her hands around it, grateful for something to hold. She looks happy, he said, nodding toward Lisa, who was currently trying to balance a cranberry on the tip of her nose while the mechanic's kids cheered. She thinks this is what Christmas is supposed to feel like, Eliza answered quietly. It is, he said simply. Then he turned, fully facing her. I was hoping you'd stay, he added, at least for tonight. She swallowed. I don't belong here, she said honestly. This isn't my world. He studied her for a long second. Before he could answer, a small hand tugged at his sleeve. Can I tell you something? Lisa asked in a stage whisper. He knelt automatically so they were eye level. Always, he murmured. She cupped her hands around his ear and whispered, just loud enough for Eliza to hear too. I want Mama to stay because I want to belong where you are. Ryan's lips parted. He stood slowly, his gaze locking with Eliza. Then stay, he said, not just tonight. The room's sound softened, not because people fell entirely silent, but because somehow in that moment the laughter and chatter faded into the background, like a soundtrack lowering beneath the dialogue that mattered. Eliza's eyes filled. Not with fear this time. With a fragile, blooming trust. I'm not, she started then stopped. I know, he said gently. You don't have to be anyone else. She looked at her daughter, this child who had walked through snow to knock on a stranger's gate because she believed her mother deserved warmth. She looked at the teacher who had given Ryan a ruler, at the boss who had given him a job, at the friend who had shared socks and jokes in a shared childhood of scarcity. Then she looked at the man who had listened to her story without flinching and shared his own. Okay, she whispered. The word was small, but the meaning behind it was huge. Later that night, when the guests had gone and the dishes were stacked in the sink waiting for morning, Lisa fell asleep in front of the fireplace, wrapped in a blanket someone's grandmother had knitted decades ago. The TV played a holiday movie on low volume. She snored softly, bear tucked beneath her chin, thumb half in her mouth despite being too old for baby things. Eliza stood at the edge of the living room, watching her. Ryan walked past with a tray, empty mugs clinking. You okay? He asked. She looked at him. Then she smiled. A real one, unforced, soft and sure. I think, she said slowly, I'm starting to be. Spring softened the edges of winter. Snow retreated from the base of the pines and gathered only in shadowed corners. The driveway, once a corridor of ice, turned to gray pavement lined with small green shoots pushing their way through thawed soil. The Blake estate no longer looked like a museum piece. There were sidewalk chalk drawings on the back patio now, a crooked hopscotch grid, a lopsided sun with too many rays, stick figures holding hands, one tall, one with a triangle dress, one small with crazy curls. On the front porch, Eliza knelt beside a clay pot, fingers deep in dark, damp soil. Her sleeves were rolled up, a streak of dirt across one cheek. She dug carefully, gently tucking the roots of a small green sprout into place. "What's that one?" Ryan asked, stepping out onto the porch. He wore jeans and a plain t-shirt, no suit in sight. There was a smudge of something, maybe charcoal, maybe grease, on his forearm from assembling the swing in the backyard earlier that day. "Lavender," Eliza said. "It smells like calm." She patted the soil down, pressing lightly. "Lisa says it reminds her of the ribbon," she added. "The blue one." Ryan sat on the step beside her, their shoulders nearly touching. "It's not much," she said, looking at the plant. "Just a little thing in a pot." He followed her gaze. "But it's rooted now," he replied. She looked at him instead of the lavender. "Yeah," she said softly, "it is." Inside, at the kitchen table, Lisa sat with pencil in hand, tongue peeking out between her teeth as she concentrated on her writing. Her homework assignment glared from the top of the page. "Write about the person who changed your life." She had crossed out "mama" 3 times, not because it wasn't true, but because it was already there, woven into every sentence she ever wrote, every picture she ever drew. This time, she wrote a different name. "The Man Who Opened the Door." Her essay told the story of a night in the snow, of hunger that made her stomach hurt and cold that made her hands burn, of watching her mother fall, of finding the courage to knock on a gate because Aunt Carla in the shelter had once told her, "Sometimes the world surprises you, kiddo, but it won't if you're too scared to ask." She wrote about soup that tasted too salty and perfect, about a safe with socks and rulers and a note, about a soft scarf and a lavender plant on the porch. She ended with one line. "He didn't just open the door to his house, he opened the door to our life." When her teacher returned the assignment, there was a gold star sticker at the top and a note in careful cursive. "This made us all cry. You have a gift and a powerful story." That evening, Lisa tucked the paper into a folder in her backpack and placed it by the door, ready for show-and-tell week. On the back porch, the sun was sinking, washing the world in orange and rose. The 3 of them sat together, Ryan in a chair, Eliza on the step, Lisa curled in a blanket on the swing, bear tucked under her chin. Ryan had grilled dinner. The vegetables were a little overdone, the chicken slightly charred at the edges. No one complained. They ate with the relaxed laziness of people who no longer rushed meals out of fear someone else would need their seat. "You know," Eliza said, sipping from her mug, "I used to think belonging meant history, a house you grew up in, a town where everyone knew your grandparents, roots going back so many years they tangled." Ryan turned his head toward her. "And now?" he asked. She glanced at Lisa, who was fighting sleep and losing. "Now," she said softly, "I think it means waking up in a place where people are glad you're there, where you're chosen, every day, not because they have to, because they want to." He reached out, brushed a strand of hair gently behind her ear, fingers lingering for a heartbeat. "We do," he said simply. Her eyes shone in the fading light. "Every day," he added. Lisa yawned dramatically. "Did we ever decide on a name for the plant?" She mumbled from the swing, voice thick with sleep. Eliza chuckled. "No," she said, "but I think it's earned one." Ryan looked at the little pot on the porch railing, the lavender sprout reaching a little taller now, leaves catching the last rays of sun. "What would you call it?" he asked. Lisa blinked slowly. "Home," she murmured, eyes closing. The breeze picked up gently, washing over them with the scent of fresh soil and faint lavender. Inside, the house glowed softly. There were scuff marks on the stairs now where small feet had run too fast. A drawing hung crooked in the hallway. A pair of tiny shoes lay abandoned near the door, one tipped on its side. It no longer looked like a showpiece. It looked lived in. Later that night, after they carried a sleeping Lisa to bed and turned off the downstairs lights, Eliza stood in the doorway of the guest room that no longer felt like guest. The photograph of David still sat on the nightstand, but now it shared space with a second photo, one of her, Ryan, and Lisa taken in the backyard. Lisa had insisted on standing between them, clutching both their hands. Two lives. Two loves. Both real, both part of who she was now. She touched both frames, one after the other with equal softness. When she crawled into bed, Ryan paused at the door. "Good night," he said. She smiled. "Good night," she replied. "Thank you for everything." He shook his head. "You knocked," he said. "I just opened the door." Outside, the wind whispered through the trees like a song, more gentle than winter's howl. Inside, three hearts beat under one roof in a rhythm they were only just beginning to trust. And somewhere deep in the house, in a bronze-colored safe that held a ruler, a pair of socks, a note, and a blue hair tie, the past and present sat side by side. Proof that no one is ever only what they lost. They are also the people they find, and the doors that open when they're brave enough to knock. Thank you for staying with us through this journey of hunger, courage, and unexpected home. The man who opened the door reminds us that sometimes the smallest act, offering warmth to a stranger, listening instead of judging, saying "come in" instead of "move along," can rewrite someone's entire world. If this story touched your heart, brought a tear to your eye, or made you believe a little more in quiet kindness, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to Kindness and Love Stories. Here, we celebrate real emotional stories about compassion, courage, and the kind of love that doesn't always arrive with fireworks, but always arrives right on time. Hit subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and let love be the story you follow next.